Welcome to the channel. Disconnected in the sense that what the fuck is going on sometimes. Anyway, this is a continuation of the previous video, and it's kind of a bit of a piece about how Prince Charles is willing to give away like $1 billion or something of extra profit that he made from the Crown Estate, especially from the wind farms over the last period, and that should go back to the Treasury, you know, for better use. But actually, I'm continuing on this video because one of my new favorite YouTubers is going to be commenting here, Garys Stevenson. And what is so interesting about him is that I've watched a ton of videos about him, of him, and he's basically all about equality when it comes to finances. The fact that the divide between rich and poor is escalating, and the Tories, the current government since 2010, 2011, and you know their part to play in this, and how the divide between rich and poor is growing so fast and is going to cause a huge amount of problems in our society. I personally would dare to say this is going to cause problems even for those that benefit from it, because if you have a society which is so unequal, it just causes problems for everyone, not just the poor. Anyway, what is interesting about the things that he says is that, in my humble opinion, from just living life currently, working, running your own business, being self-employed, watching the news, kind of being on top of politics as much as you can, there is nothing that he said which is either a surprise, nor I would say something that people don't really, by now at least, absolutely clearly see happening. So it's not like you need some special statistical guru, financial guru, economic scientist, you know, political journalist to actually tell you these things, because they are so obvious. And the reason they're so obvious is because you can actually see and feel it happening, and you can actually see it in the way that politicians are actually talking to us right at this moment. If you remember the speeches that Sunak gave, if you remember all the PPE contracts that were handed out in during COVID, Liz Truss blatantly wanting to give the rich people more and take money from the poor, or you know, the middle class, or the upper low middle class and low class, whatever you want to call it. It is not even hidden anymore. So we don't need some kind of PhD person to tell us things for us to believe it. It is now absolutely clear as day what is happening right in front of our eyes. Now, what makes Gary interesting is that, firstly, his YouTube channel has been growing pretty fast, and he he addresses all these issues, but he also does it in a very clear way. So, you know, it's not some lingo that us mere mortals, us mere common folk don't understand. Anyway, let's just see what he says about this. You should really go. I'll have a link to his channel at the bottom. Just check out his videos. Regardless if you're left or right or center or whatever, it is just the way that certain things are explained in a nice and clear and concise way. So please have a look at that. But let's look at this little clip. This is, like I said, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but it is worthwhile because there's context here.
You heard in the headlines, King Charles, multi-millionaire, has asked for a surge in profits from the Crown Estate in offshore wind farms to be used for what he called the wider public good. So it would mean that some money set aside for the sovereign grant. You can see here the headline in the Times, King's Crown Estate wind farm to generate £1 billion for Britain. It would be set aside normally for the sovereign grant, which runs the royal household. But in this case, he's suggesting it be retained by the Treasury and can be used for public spending. So should the rest of the rich be doing something similar? What do you make of the King's decision and announcement today? A good?
Oh, it's very generous of him. I wish I had £1 billion I could donate away and be able to afford. But it's not enough. It's not enough. In the last 3 years, the government's given out £700 billion. That would be enough to give 14,000.
So just in case it didn't come clear through the audio from the video, that's 700 billion with a B, not million with an M. 700 billion.
£1,000 to every single adult in the country. Now, if you're going to give out that amount of money, you need to do an analysis of where that money is going to end up. You have to. And at the beginning of COVID, I was screaming out, let's do an analysis of who's going to end up with the £700 billion. The Conservatives didn't do it, Labour didn't do it, the BBC didn't do it. So I did it, and what I found out was that money was going to overwhelmingly end up with the richest people in society. That's enough money to give the richest 5 million adults in this country £140,000 each.
Now, you were a million.
So I'm going to stop it there. That point is enough to make your blood curl. So it's just an explanation of... So this money that they're talking about is all government contracts, stuff like that. It was just like in 2008, when there was a massive kind of recession and all the banks needed bailout. And there were two thoughts of how to solve it. One of them was, okay, we're going to bail out all the banks, because if the banks fail, that's going to be really bad for the economy. The other thought was, no, the real problem is money isn't moving because people don't have any money, so there's no economic activity. So if we rather take all these billions that we gave to the banks, but we rather split that up and we gave it to the people, then they would go out and buy stuff, and that buying of stuff would kind of kickstart the economy again. So essentially, it worked out something like if they didn't bail out the banks, but they actually gave it to the people, there would be something like £2,000 per person that would have been able to be handed out. Now that we're talking about just the UK, the US was even more significant. But what happened was that all that money went to the banks. The people who actually broke the banks, the GMs, the CEOs, etc. of the time, who were obviously incompetent, otherwise their businesses wouldn't have failed, or their businesses wouldn't have been in such dire straits. It was also because of gambling with people's money. It was also because they were buying in or letting out loans that were, subpar. We all know the subprime issue in the States, which kind of essentially started the whole financial crisis. But essentially all these people that were really at the top of the decision-making game, they all still had their salaries, they all got packages, they all still had their and pensions and redundancies and all sorts, and they walked away with big fancy houses. So every time something happens which really breaks the bank of a society, it's not just that the rich get away with it or get away with it unscathed, it's that, at least in my lifetime, it seems that they have massively profited from those scenarios.